What's up, everyone? Paul the Trombonist here. I'm super excited. Dear friend of mine, amazing trombonist, Alan Kaplan, is back in the house on Bone Masters. He recently got done recording a really amazing project, and I just finished listening to it a few weeks ago, and then I listened to it again, and then again, and again, and again. And I wanted to have him on here because it's multi-track trombone, and I wanted to ask him some questions on how he went about putting this together so that you guys can also learn from him on his process on recording something of this caliber. And it's going to be a good time. Good time. So how you doing, Alan?
I'm good, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Good to see you.
You too.
Yeah, so this project, you've done a lot of multi-tracking in the past. I've seen another album you had, and I'm just curious, do you do this from your home studio?
Yeah, I do.
And when you map it out, you have like it all charted out? Is it like an arrangement?
Yeah, the arrangements for this album and the previous one were already in existence. They were from Hoyt Bohannon, which was a group that, rehearsed for over 40 years in LA with all the top players at one time or another being in there. And the arrangements are of transcriptions from classical pieces, from film cues. Hoyt was on staff at Warner Brothers originally, back when they had staff orchestras. And if he played a cue on a film that he really liked and thought it might be fun on trombones, he would get a copy of the conductor's sketch, take it home, and orchestrate it out for trombones. Then the guys would get together and play this ridiculously hard stuff with flute solos, violin solos, whatever, and try to play it on trombone. It was all just for fun.
And you would meet in his garage, is that correct?
Yeah, he had a room made out of part of his garage that was big enough to house all the arrangements, and we could have as many as 10 guys in there at one time, circled around the stands. We normally would trade off parts, have somebody conduct and a couple people resting, and then kind of just rotate around so everybody got a chance to play first. And the 2 or 3 bass trombones that would show up would alternate the high and low parts.
Wow. So what was the typical personnel, like the standard group that would come around for that?
All right. Well, when I first got in there, which was the mid 70s, way back, there were people, regulars there were my teacher, Roy Main, Bill Toll, who was another one of my previous teachers before Roy. We had Jim Sawyer, Tommy Peterson, of course. Tommy and Hoyt were the 2 guys that ran it. So Tommy Peterson, Hoyt Bohannon, and then we had people like Ron Smith, Bill Booth came along, Bill Broughton, I don't know if I mentioned, he was a regular. And we had Barrett O'Hara on bass trombone, Morris Repass on bass trombone, and a lot of other people. Bob Sanders came in. And as the group went on, Steve Holtman came in, John Lays came in, and Bruce Otto became a regular. Jim Boltinghouse came along right about the time I did, and he became the most knowledgeable guy about that whole library. He's my go-to guy when I record this stuff, because he's the most knowledgeable about all these things.
Nice. And you guys would pass the different parts around, like
we rotate
different section parts. Okay, cool. Yeah.
The parts would stay on the stands and we would rotate. It was fun. So you knew you were going to get a chance to play first. And the conductor, whoever was which was great experience too, we picked the tune. So look out. If you know that this guy's going to conduct, he's going to make you play this, whatever. So it was kind of fun. We had a little gamesmanship too.
Nice. So then you kind of had this burning desire to document some of these charts then and lay them down, right? Tell me more about that.
I did, because we did concerts that were recorded, and we even went into the studio a couple times when somebody got some studio time, but the parts are so hard, it was really hard to get it without flaws. And I wanted, for Hoyt's sake, to get these things recorded without clamps. I could take all the time in the world it took me to get through this stuff, and I knew I could play all the parts. Because trying to get the guys together now, which would have been ideal, it just would have been impossible, So that's why.
What part did you start with?
Depends on the part, because if you listen, first of all, the first part moves around through all 4 or 5 tenor parts. So the lead may not be in the first book, it may be in the fourth at certain times. But I tried to put down whatever part played the most because the time things you want to lock in with. It could be the second trombone that actually has more bars. So I might do the second first. You know,
That makes sense.
I ideally, whenever I overdub projects, I like to start top down.
Why is that?
And that the highest part.
Yeah, why that approach? Just what you find that helps
Well,
with that?
because the first part is really dictating the dynamics,
Hmm.
hopefully the pitch center and the lengths of the notes and fermatas. And then I'll go work my way down through the bass trombone. And then what I generally do for pitch reasons, I revisit and see where a couple, maybe the inner voices didn't lock in pitch wise, and then I'll redo some of that stuff. But I like to have the foundation be the highest voice I can, if I can. It depends on the arrangement.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. Plus that part's out of the way, and then everything else gets a little bit easier sometimes.
It can, but like I said, it depends. With Hoyt's charts, sometimes the hardest thing ends up in the 5th book. So you never really know.
So he gives someone a little piece, no matter where you're at. You got to be on your toes.
Exactly. That's what the fun of the group was. It was everybody shared in the work. It was great.
Cool. So the recording process, you lay down the top voice, typically first, not always, usually where the most movement's at. And then from there, you layer them kind of just in what's the next order, like the next amount of movement?
Yeah, the next one down, or generally once I've got the whatever part, then I'll try to do the highest voices first. So if I did the second trombone first, then I'll go do the first trombone, most likely. And but before all that happens, key is the tempo map.
How do you do that? That's my question. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, and that's the first thing before I ever play a note. And some of these pieces, like on this album, there's a lot of rubato. On Tosca, which is an aria, and the singer takes great time with these. So I had to program that in because you cannot play together with yourself trying to memorize all that. You've got to lay in a click. So I lay in a click tempo map.
That's the first thing you do probably, right?
Yeah, that's the first thing I do. And in order to make it really sound rubato, you have to change the tempo, like within the bar, maybe on the 3rd beat, go to a new tempo. I might add beats. However, I can smoothly get to where I want to go from note to note, time-wise. So it's really painstaking, Paul, because I'll lay in something that feels good, and then I'll play to the clicks and go, no, that's not what I had in mind. So then I'll redo it. And I learned the hard.
So the time map actually is more in certain ways more, no pun intended, time consuming than laying down the parts.
Oh, you know what? It absolutely is. And for example, I did this on both my Secrets of Hoyt's Garage albums, the last one, and then the one I just did, More Secrets, repeating them. Both of those have Singers Unlimited arrangements that Hoyt transcribed. I have both sides now on this new one, and Fool on the Hill.
That's Gene Perling, right?
They're both Gene Perling arrangements, and Hoyt didn't change anything. He just simply transcribed for trombones. He had a wonderful ear, and he was able to do that brilliantly. And he changed the keys so it would work for trombones. But since there's no way I could ever improve on their tempos, I imported their recording. And then I built my click track to match their tempos.
Oh, cool.
However many, we have fermatas and the pause after the fermata to the next syllable, whatever. I completely mimicked their tempos with my click tracks.
Smart.
Then
that's awesome.
when I recorded, I had that, that perfect Singers Unlimited tempo built in.
Awesome. So here's a question. Now, when you're layering your bone like that, do you use the same instrument for each parts, or how do you do that?
This is what I try to do. I've found that the more variations I can create, the more natural it'll sound, because it really can get that artificial phase sound if you use same instrument, same mic angle. So I have a variety of different tenor trombones that I play on. I've got a King, I've got a BAC, I've got a Yamaha. I have a couple of different Canstels, one of my signature models that I was playing. And I also have my large bore. I used the large bore on quite a few of the inner voices. In this case, it's my Con 88H.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the bass trombones. And I also would vary my mic position just a little bit, change the axis of the angle, just
Mhm.
enough to give it a little different color.
That's smart. That's like a more of a section, and it's not just one person
It
can play.
is,
Yeah.
because you don't have 6 or 7 of the same person in sections. The beauty of them is that everyone has their own different sound, different overtones, and that's what makes it natural.
But the same mic though for every.
Yeah, I'm pretty much, I
You're
have
a ribbon guy. You
varied
got the
mics.
RCA, right? Is that the one you
I've
use?
got RCA 44s, two
Yeah, that's
original,
freaking
two
awesome.
original 44s. On the Secrets album, the original one, which was 15 tracks, I did switch between a couple of different mics. I even used the Cascade ribbon that I have, the Victor, for a couple of things to add to some of the difference. But on this last project, I didn't change mics because I knew I could do enough stuff in post to change what I needed to without changing the mics.
Oh, cool. So yeah, for those that are listening, that's the mic that's like the iconic studio broadcast in a radio station, right? It's the big one. Yeah,
can I
bring
move my screen to show you?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So let's see. There you go. You've probably seen one of these. That's my first one. And then here's the one that I've been playing in. There you go. Okay. Those are RCA 44B, probably made in the 30s, these two. You know.
Yeah, and it's amazing that it just goes to show that the only thing that's really changed is where the sound is captured,
Right.
Not how the sound was captured.
Exactly. And it's really funny, you know, when I got these, which a number of years ago, all the studio trombone players insisted that these were the best sounding mics for trombones, and a lot of the studios, the major studios, were using these. Every time I'd show up there, they'd be. Capitol still uses them, original RCAs, and now in the last 20 years, they've been basically reinventing the wheel and coming up with new ribbon mics. Basically,
yeah, replicas.
Yeah, replicas, and also new ones, because turns out it's a very primitive technology, but it's right for trombone.
Yeah, it sounds beautiful.
Yeah, so
really nice. Yeah, so as far as mixing now, so you got all the tracks. First, you got the tempo map dialed in.
right.
You got the tracks laid in. You probably did some intonation punch-ins that you need to or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And probably some cleanup, you know, that goes after that, though. Let's talk about the mixing process, because I've always been fascinated with your mix. And if I understand correctly, you mix your own music, right?
I do.
Yeah, so that's impressive to me, because your mixes always sound killer. So tell me and share with us some little gems you got about mixing multiple trombone tracks.
Well, first of all, from a technical standpoint, I'm using Pro Tools to do my mix. And so I'm using automated mixing. Now, do I need to describe that? Should I describe how that works?
Go ahead.
On Pro Tools, there's a thing you can do to automate mixes. You select volume on each track. Each track, you can be wave file, volume, blocks, whatever. If you select volume, then you'll see this little line going all the way across. And you take your mouse and you click it on a line, you'll see a little dot. And what you do is put another dot next to it, and that's going to be the left side of the area you want to change the volume on. Then you go over to wherever you've decided that's enough that you want to change, the end point of that volume adjustment, you do 2 more dots. And then with a mouse, you drag those dots up or down, and that's how you make it louder. That's automated louder. And you could, or down to make it lower, and it's all by feel. And as many different dot points you make, the more volume changes you can program in. And basically what you're doing is those dots move the faders. When you play back something that you've used that kind of volume adjustment, you'll see the faders, your virtual faders, going up and down to follow that. So first of all, that's how I make the volume changes. But in terms of wanting where I decide to do those volumes, I will take section by section, where it's like the Singers Unlimited one is a good example. You hear the solo volume, and then you hear the background chords. So I'll just be isolating the background chords, and I'll just try to make adjustments so that whether it's 3 voices, 4 voices, whatever it is, to my ear, sound even, you know, to what I think sounds right. And also very important, before you do that, I think it's important to set the pan. Because when you have everything all on one channel, you get an overload. Like, if everything is set to center, you get an unnatural overload and you can't really hear what you're doing. So I do the separation with the pan adjustment. So, you know, for example, with my trombone group, I'll generally have the two bass trombones split, if it's two, farthest and panned to the center with my tenors.
Okay, so typically, let's say in a trombone section, the lead, where would you place that on the pan?
Well, that's a little tricky with the Hoyt stuff because it moves so much. Ideally, you would probably have it, if you're going to just have it where it's lead all the time, probably center or center most, depending how even. And then I try to evenly space each part out from there, you know. And you just set the dial so it's all number values that you put in. But basically, I would start at the center and have 2 and 3 equally on the sides of it. 4, you know, 4 and 5, 6 and 7.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
now, go ahead.
But I think it's important to get the pan, because then when you start adjusting mix volumes, it's clearer as to what's right. Because it's a little, to my ear, it's very deceptive when they're all centered in the same mono track. So I do that. First, I set the pan. And then I just, by ear, listen to make sure. So any like sections like that, where it's like a background chord, I try to make sure nobody's sticking out. And then if I find that once I've got that, the solo volume may have been a little bit too low and it's getting buried, I'll either bring up the solo or I'll pull the background back, depending on, you know, when you're doing it yourself, you got to make sure you listen what your starting volume was and what your end volume of the piece is, because it's all relative. And
now,
you can end up, go ahead.
How are you referencing this? Do you have like certain studio monitors you like to listen to out of? Do you test it on small speakers? Tell me that process.
Yeah, I've got some JBL. Recently I bought some studio monitors. There's some nice 8-inch monitors, and that's what I use. And I also use headphones a lot. You know, I go back and forth because it's interesting. I probably do a little bit more in the headphones first, and then I double check myself with speakers. You know,
do you do the car test?
I do that too. But the funny thing about the car is you got to be sitting there with the car parked and sit there between the seats, because otherwise you're getting all driver's side. You know?
Oh, that's true. And then you're like hurting your crotch.
Exactly. But I got to tell you, I always second guess my mixes, and I burn it onto a disc and I play on every stereo I can find and every set of speakers I can find, because no matter what, it's always different. Right. And you try to guess what is the most common sound that people are going to be listening to it on, and try to get a mix that works. Yeah. It's really funny. So I go round and round and round fine tuning my mixes. It takes me a long time to settle on a mix, just because, you know, and that's just the levels. We haven't even gotten into the next step, which is the you know, EQ and reverb.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to talk about that, right? So you have the dry trombone, just boom. When it's dry, is that when you do the pans, or do you add the plugins first before the pans?
No, I do the pan first. And I do my preliminary mixing, you know, with it dry, with all the levels. Then the next thing, I'm sorry?
Then what do you add?
The next thing I do, when I've got what I think is a pretty good basic mix, and the pan I think is proper, and the levels seem to be good, then I go to my plugins. And there's all kinds of different EQ plugins you can use. And it's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of values you can numerically change within this. But basically on my equals, I'll give a basic example. I'll use a version of a low pass. Okay. And that you'll see that on any EQ. And that's basically filtering out some of the extraneous highs, but leaving the low where it belongs. Now you'll get a preset, whichever one you're using, and then you can, I start with something like that, and I move it to, because all of us have, if you ever notice, you put your ear in front of somebody's bell, like a couple feet away, like this distance a mic would be, you're going to hear little extraneous highs and sounds, airiness. That's present in our sounds. And what we want to do, that goes away in a room. If you're sitting in an audience and hearing somebody play, that airiness doesn't reach you. Right. So we want to get our home recording to sound like that.
Makes
So
sense.
what we do is electronically, we remove those same sounds with EQ.
Okay, so dry sound, pan. Then we go to the EQ.
Right.
Then the next step is after that's cool, what's next?
Generally, there's a remix because every time I do the EQ to where I like it, I've found that I've lost a little bit of volume, probably in some of the higher voices, or just that the lower voices are starting to protrude a little bit because of my low pass.
Mm-hmm.
So then I readjust my mixes, but it's not a big adjustment. So I can just revisit, and all those dots and stuff that I put in are always available to me to slide up and down, whatever.
That's the volume automation, right?
Right. The volume automation are those dots on the volume setting on the Pro Tools. Okay, so I remix a little bit to get because of that. And then the next thing is reverb. And there's so many variables. There's no one thing. In fact, I use there's 7 tracks on this current album, and I use really 7 different settings, 7 different verbs.
Okay, so you got a different verb on each track.
Pretty on each tune. Yeah.
Each tune. Do you bust them down to one track where there's just one channel strip for all the section, or
They
have their own
they go.
reverb?
It's a master. Yeah, they're all bused to a master reverb channel.
Okay,
And that's where my plugin is. Yeah, you don't want to be doing it on individual channels. That gets real messy.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah. So you get it down to a stereo master reverb channel.
Cool.
So everything buses, everything buses to it.
So it's like it's all in one room kind of a situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there are so many alto verb. There's so many wonderful reverbs. Mine that I've been using, that I use for this, is called Valhalla Room. And it's got a whole bunch of wonderful preset verbs, large chamber, small room, and with large room. And within each one of those, large room, there might be 15 presets. Large chamber, there might be 15. There's so many, but each one of them, when you call it up, has values and different, and then you can change, or sliders and knobs to change things. So you go by ear, you know, and the more. And the basic one, there's one slider that says mix. That's the one where you get the most sounding distant or close. Dry is close. The farther away, the farther it sounds. And then there's the duration, because you can have it ring out like a cathedral sound where it's like an 8-second delay. Ring out. Well, you don't want that, most likely. So then you can change the seconds duration to, you know, something typical is like around 2.3 seconds, 3 seconds at the most. That's pretty wet. Okay. You know, any wetter than 3, you're getting into like St. Paul's sound, and you may want that.
Now, at what point do you add the compression on?
You know what? I did not use compression.
Okay.
The reason I did, and compression is a very handy thing, and I've used it on a lot of things, but that's basically, you know, the beginnings of compression were so that people couldn't be listening to AM radio in their car and not have something get so soft that they can't hear it and have to turn it up, then have the loud be too loud, so that it compresses everything to a modicum volume. These pieces that I just played have such a wonderful dynamic range that I didn't want to compress them. So I didn't use compression. So like any classical music, you know, you're probably not going to listen to it in the car that well and be able to appreciate the whole volume. But that was a choice I made on this project, was to not compress. And that's a personal choice. But if you do use compression, it would be the same thing. I would probably add the compression after I do the EQ and before the reverb.
Okay.
Because it's going to affect those things. And after compressing, again, you may want to adjust your EQ a little bit, or your mix. Compression is going to make you adjust your mix a little bit.
Would you compress on one channel strip, or were there bus to all one strip, or individual?
No, tracks? I always compress bust. I always compress the final.
Just one final master out compressed.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, you're not the first person that I met that didn't want to use compression on a horn section.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a big band album in town of someone we both know that they said they went against the engineers desires and said no compression.
Oh, good. Well, I firmly believe in that, because there's no compression when you're sitting in a club listening to a band. There's no compression when you're sitting in a hall listening to an orchestra play. So we don't need to worry about how it sounds on AM radio.
Right.
No one's doing that anymore. So
yeah, and for this kind of music, it's not totally necessary. Like maybe for pop music, whatever. Like
yeah, I think for pop music it probably is, because you don't want to have to, the whole thing is you don't want to have to be, the listener shouldn't have to adjust their volume all the time while they're listening. But that's where we get into my next step, which is mastering.
All right, let's talk about that.
Yeah, and the mastering is actually where I would do the compression. I take that back. That's where I would do the compression in the master.
Okay.
Some people do it before. I personally like to do it at the end when I master. However, I didn't do it this time. When I mastered, all I did for this was line up every tune so that I could get, number one, the distance, the space between each track where I wanted, which in this case was 3 seconds, from the very end of the ring out of the verb to the very beginning of the next track. I wanted 3 seconds. That was simple. That's just sliding it over. That's a fairly simple thing to do.
And made sure each track kind of matched in volume, right?
That's the challenging part, because you can't, you can look at the wave files. Well, this tune's a lot louder here than this one gets, but you don't want it to sink it down. So that's a little bit of trial and error too. And also when I selected the order I wanted it to be in, I thought, well, leading from the end of this track to this, I don't want it to be like shocking and maybe someone's going to go for their volume control again, So you want to try to make it seamless. And that's really, there's no formula. It's just your own ears. And I don't know if I did a good job or not. This is just
it's amazing, man.
The way I did it. So,
I'm always blown away. This is, everyone's got to check it out. So as far as what's next, I'll probably have some of the music playing in the background too at this point.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
So, yeah, so they can hear it, right?
Sure.
So where can one check out this awesome project where they can really learn potential of multiple trombones?
Yeah, well, More Secrets of Hoyt's Garage is now available on all the Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, Deezer. And it's also available on on Amazon Music. The CDs itself are for sale. If you look at my Here Now link, we'll post the Here Now has a place to click for buy, and also on my website. I have where people can either buy from Amazon if they click buy now, or they can order it from me. I take PayPal, and then I can sign a copy and mail it out myself for people.
There you go. That's the way to do it. Awesome.
It actually saves them money, and it's better for me because I'm not paying Amazon if I do it.
Yeah, and you want Alan's signature because Alan's a
absolutely
legend, so everyone get it.
Win-win. Win-win.
Yeah, totally. That's phenomenal, man. I love it so much. It's definitely every recording you put out is like world class. So not just that recording, everyone should check out all of your recordings. And the one that I really love as well is the Lonely Town, man. That's a gem. So definitely check that out as well. Same mic too, right?
Yep, that was the same 44. I brought it with me over to the studios. First one with O. Henry, and then we did it over at Citrus College with my trusty 44.
That's wonderful, man. So that was an education. I learned so much as far as like the recording process. So
any other things? I'm just a novice at this too. Believe me, I'm not an engineer, but I've learned how to do my stuff,
Well, sometimes that's better because then you don't have to unlearn bad habits. And some people think that they know everything, and you just go with what's real, which is your ear.
Exactly. And engineers have their, they have their own preference, what sounds right to them, and we might disagree, So ultimately, when it's your project, it's kind of nice to have that kind of control without having to, disagree with somebody.
That is nice. That's nice. About building up your engineering chops is you can do that and just put projects out there like that. When did you first start doing your own projects?
Well, I started tinkering with multi-tracking back even when I had an analog 4-track TIAC Porta Studio. It used a cassette and
Yeah, I
with
remember.
4 channels on a cassette.
Yeah.
And then when I got the Tascam first digital one, that's when I did the 2 bonus tracks that are on Lonely Town. They're another Hoyt Bohannon arrangement of Singers Unlimited, Try to Remember, and an original arrangement of Don't Like Goodbyes by Bob Alcivar. And those I did in 2001 on that digital Tascam. So I learned about tempo mapping from that, even though I had to do it on a little 4-inch screen. You know, it wasn't on a computer screen. It wasn't Pro Tools. It just had its own internals, and it was 7 channels. And that's how I did those. So that's going back to 2001. That's the first digital. And back then, the only way I could punch in, I couldn't automate punches like you can now. I had a foot pedal hooked up, and I would press the button with my foot to make a punch.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's old school.
Real old school. And sometimes
Nice,
the button
man.
would make a noise and I'd be screwed. So I had to figure out how to push it softly enough, put it under a pillow so I can still press it.
Amazing. Awesome, Alan. Well, thank you so much for being here. And everyone definitely check that out. I'll put the link in the description. And you're going to want to get the signed copy from Alan because that's the way to go. Sweet, man. All right, cool. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Sure. Thank you. My pleasure.